Hi, I'm Fleur.
Hello, I'm Ellie.
And I'm Sarah Jane. We're Hand to Help, three art psychotherapists.
Welcome to our podcast, The Spirit of Creative Entanglement.
And today's podcast, we're going to be talking about and thinking about new beginnings in the therapy room.
Mm.
And as usual, we've carried on sort of with our, I say, tradition. I mean, we're very early days with our ritual, maybe, of bringing something to the podcast, whether it's us or whether it's the guests we've invited, and it's our objects. And would you like me to start with the object?
Yeah, go with it.
It's a very, I didn't think too hard and deep about this, but I sometimes think that's the best way. And actually, just before we got together this morning, I made myself a cup of tea. And I was thinking about new beginnings in therapy. And so I brought my tea, which I've now drunk, but this is the teacup the tea was in. And I was thinking about this as a container, and how we often refer to that containing and holding in the therapy space, and what that looks like. And we can kind of theorize it, the holding and containing, but also it's just as much, it's down to us as a therapist, in terms of our presence and how our presence is a felt sense to the client of that holding and that containing, and how important that is. So that was, around sort of containing. The tea was in here, but also I was thinking about the metaphor of a cup of tea. And I know that's actually changed probably over the last couple of years, because this is probably a bit of a digression, but it's thinking around what a different generation think about a cup of tea now, which is around consent for sex, and the way that the cup of tea is used as a metaphor to explain that, and particularly for women, for girls, in around using the cup of tea metaphor for putting some boundaries in around consensual sex. So
Mm.
got a very different kind of a metaphor attached to it now than that sort of that kind of providing nourishment from a cup of tea. Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, initially, when I picked it up, I was thinking, oh, this is gonna contain my tea today. Ah, cup of tea container, yes. So, and often, sometimes we think about having a cup, and where things are overflowing, that might be the time that clients are coming into therapy because just life is overflowing, and yeah, so it's a cup of tea.
Oh, I think that's great because we do. Oh, this is so English of us, but I having a cup of tea. I don't know about you guys, but growing up for me, like if something was going on, I'd come in to either mum's or dad's, and I would sit down, and it would be like, okay, well, let's have a cup of tea. Let's sit down and try and sort this out and try and work this out or talk about this between us around a cup of tea. Um, and it brings up so much of thought of, food or drink or stuff in practice, which is probably a completely different podcast, which I know we do that every time, but I promise we'll get to them. But I think that's really lovely as of a beginning to a beginning of a conversation, a beginning of an opening up, a kind of bringing together of two people, or of people if you're doing group therapy, and what we do around that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
so
so, definitely. I think we could for sure do an entire podcast on a cup of tea, without a doubt. For me, that what came up when you said that was, yeah, again, new beginnings. For me, I always actually hold in mind my cup of tea, which I remember many, many years ago when I was going through a very difficult time, the kind of time when you might think about, I wonder where I can get some help and support. And somebody said to me, try and find a little moment in your day for yourself, whatever that looks like. And for me, it became this ritual of a cup of tea. And whatever was happening, I'd always make time for my cup of tea. And so, again, thinking about therapy and a new beginning and tea is it's lovely,
Mm.
Flair. There's so much in that just coming from, yeah, your
yeah,
cup this morning.
that's reminding me of I have a client that I work with, and through some of our work, we ended up talking about a teaspoon of joy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's actually really important in the beginning of therapy too, because I think there's can be this rush of I've got to tell you everything that terrible has happened to me, and I've got to get all this trauma, and I've got to understand, which is fine, absolutely acceptable and available, and come and do that. But also for us as therapists to be able to bring in the other side. How do they look after themselves after that initial assessment or beginning in therapy when, as you say, Fleur, things are overflowing? And is it, bringing in this metaphor, or bringing in this moment of you welcome in here with your stuff and everything you can bring, obviously, but when you leave here, it's going to be week by week, maybe even bi-weekly. How do you look after yourself, and how do you take care of yourself starting this process of therapy? And it can be therapeutic just to let go and talk about all that stuff, but try and find a teaspoon of joy a day. So, a tiny, tiny teaspoon of joy a day. And that just reminded me of that. We
Yeah.
can go forward.
Isn't it? Because, you know, we do often think about, that teaspoon of joy is, and how that capacity can then be increased, becoming a tablespoon, to becoming something else that actually we want to be able to build is capacity. For that, because there are going to be tough times, and so with the diving in. But however, where is that sort of, again, that sense of agency and containment for themselves and holding for themselves outside of the therapy room,
Yeah.
and build that capacity, resilience. Well, that's another podcast, I think. But we often use the word resilience, but I wonder sometimes around actual capacity, because some people's capacity is very, very small and needs support to be increased. And it doesn't
Absolutely.
they are resilient. They may not be, but they may have somewhere capacity, and it might only be a teaspoon. And that's something to start.
Yeah, we've got to start, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if your object follows on from this at all, Sarah Jane. Mine doesn't really, but I wondered if.
Well, only in the sense of my object. I'll go into my object then. It's only in the sense that for me, what I've brought is a notebook, which is I've got lots of brand new notebooks, which this one is not started yet. And for me, there is something really wonderful about the new page, turning a page, and it's fresh and clean, and this feeling of a new beginning. And the connection, I think, with a cup of tea is when I do it, again, I have a little bit of a ritual. I always start a new notebook with my cup of tea and just have a moment, because it's something really lovely about, I wonder what is going to be written on this page. And
It's containment again as well, though, isn't it?
containment again. Yeah, yeah,
So, it's
absolutely.
if you're
Yeah.
keeping that to your therapy, keeping that journal to your therapy, the aftermath of your, sessions, or the in-betweens, or even in therapy, obviously we
Well,
can.
yeah, because that was something I was thinking of with it, because I don't write notes in therapy. That's not something I do. I know a lot of therapists do. I think, Ellie, you do sometimes, but I don't, except for the very first session. So this is the new beginning, the first time I've met my client, and I have my new notebook, and I'm opening the page and learning about them and their story. And it is a whole new beginning of a potential therapy journey. And there is something really important about that, and giving them the space and time for this new chapter in their lives, because that's something really important, isn't it? That I guess you don't think about as a client, maybe when you're coming to therapy for the first time. There's going to be so much going on for you in that moment that there's not going to be, I would imagine, the space and thought for this is a new beginning for the therapist. But on the therapist side, it is always that new beginning as well. It's the start of a new journey. And what is this going to be like? Where's this going to lead? And they're all so unique. There is no two journeys that are the same. So yeah, for me, I'm sitting at my desk here, and I have a pile of of notebooks all waiting to be started. And I love that. There's something really, yeah, special about that for me.
That's a lovely idea too, because I'm thinking about how the written word can be very grounding as well.
Yeah.
Uh, Not just about grounding your thoughts in terms of this new beginning that you're entering with, with your client, but also actually thinking of having been a client, what would that be like? That actually there's a validation there as well, that somebody is listening, hearing me, somebody's interested in my
Yeah.
story enough to make notes, enough to be able to have a new notebook, enough to be able to contain that. And then again, that's, we've been talking about contracting, haven't we, before in therapy? And so what does this mean? Together we're exploring, and you're hearing my story and you're keeping that, and how you hold that in your therapy space when I'm not here. And so there's lots of there's so much in just your notebook that's being held in that first session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of leads me on to not the contracting bit, but the person that is coming. My object is a postcard, but it's of this image here, of an acorn tree growing out of a bear. And it just made me think when I was looking at this image of, who is the person coming? And what is available to grow out of them, from this very, very new stage, and how they might feel about themselves, and how difficult that first session is. They may feel that they're this big, awkward, grizzly bear that no one can handle, or no one can deal with, or or all the things that we come to therapy with, and then this kind of beautifulness of being able to grow, just from that first stage. And yeah, they're all kind of little acorns on there.
So
I
you've
love
got,
that. That's really beautiful. And it's so makes me think again, yeah, when you see a new client, you meet them for the first time, what do you see? And as therapists, we do see so much beyond, yeah, that grizzly bear sitting, it's what,
Yeah,
yeah, the possibility, the potential, the hopes,
yeah.
yeah,
all of those things are in the room with you, aren't they?
yeah,
And I think that that's really key, that word, Sarah Jane, for me, that word potential.
Mm.
Because often, because of our defenses, we often can hide our potential too. We don't realize, because we're so busy working so hard in keeping those defenses, because they're so important for our own kind of self-preservation, that actually we can bypass the potential.
Yeah,
That's something that, as art psychotherapist, I feel that creativity can begin to unfold, and yes,
mm,
as much as it does those defenses and what's behind them, but I think also it can do that for potential as well. And it is, we come back to that capacity, it's fostering that, it's building that capacity.
yeah,
And the more that you can support that side, the more that, if a client wants to, you can explore other parts that perhaps they feel are less favorable about themselves. Yeah, and I think that yeah, so your postcard is very, the image is a very strong image, and a very creative image too. And I think, when we bring it back to new beginnings in a therapy room, it's interesting because when we think about grading and the safety of the creativity work, we often start with postcards.
mm,
yeah,
We often, don't we, as a way to introduce image, as a
yeah,
way to introduce projections, our own projections onto images, before we go into using other kinds of materials in the therapy room. So yeah, so postcards is a really apt one, I think, to bring when we're thinking about new beginnings in therapy. Yeah.
yeah. I would say I almost always introduce postcards as that first graded activity intervention. Um, and it's so incredible what can come through that exercise, isn't it? But it's again, I think all three of us have brought objects around containment, things that we work with and introduce, and just make sure in that first session the containment is present.
Yeah, and there was something when I was looking at the postcards, and this one then stood out. There was something about it coming from the right, the center
Yeah.
the bear, like right deep down. And I'm thinking about, and I love, Fleur, how you talk about the defenses, the big claws, the big teeth, the big, or even the fluffiness or the furriness or the cuddliness of that someone that's coming in, and wondering how deep, sometimes not even that deep, but is this seed
Yeah.
to grow, this tree, or this opportunity inside them, and how deep that can be. And so the containment of that in that person,
Mm.
and I suppose in a sense it's our job to sit with all those
Mm.
defenses, all those needs, enough that they can then feel safe enough in sometimes quite a vulnerable place to find that seed,
Yeah.
to learn how to grow from it, and how to produce whatever tree they want, and I'm also quite interested in, there's quite a few branches on this, but you may find that it only gets to here and a little one grows, but that's enough. You may find that you're with a client for 6 weeks because that's all that they can afford, or they've got on a kind of insurance or something, and but it just means that they've located that seed, and no matter where they get to, they know that that resides inside them.
Yeah. And it's the kind of, again, those metaphors of particularly the acorn, where little acorns and big acorn, and big oak trees grow, and but that that seed, and how it doesn't, everyone's tree is going to be so different. When we think of, for example, the work around the tree of life. Sometimes we find ourselves working with, and yet every person's tree is going to be very different.
They are unique.
Big oak tree. It might just be a slightly smaller tree, but that's their tree. And that's how their tree will respond to their environment, because that's their capacity. And it's, so it's just really acknowledging that, isn't it? But I really do like the idea that it's igniting something, or perhaps igniting, but sort of finding, another word, I can't quite think of it at the moment. I'm thinking sort of, something that's found, if you like, finding something that then you can give space for it to grow. And whether you, like you say, Ellie, whether that's in the therapy space, if you've got time for that, or whether that is just what the space has been used for, to
Yeah.
uncover it. And then there's the ability to be able to foster that outside of the therapy. Yeah.
And thinking of seeds just reminds me as well, it takes me back to something that I think it was a supervisor said to me right at the early stages of training, in those first early days of practice, that everything is already in the room at that beginning, in that very first session. Everything is there. And yes, there's an unfolding and a discovering and an exploration, and all of that is part of the journey, but actually everything is held there. And that's again beautifully represented in that postcard. Whatever's going to grow, whatever's going to come, whatever shoots, whatever seeds, they're all there already in the room. And that very, very first beginning.
Yeah. And that's the hope you hold, I think, isn't it? For,
Mm.
for your clients. That's what that sometimes they can't hold for many a session, that's
Yeah,
possible. Or something positive even will come out of something to do with being with self
yeah,
in a judgmental space. And it's making me think how important, and I think maybe years of doing it, I've potentially lost this until we're talking, but how important that first session is.
yeah,
I always I always say it. This is just that you turned up today is an incredible thing, just that you've walked through this door. And you know, I personally know, having been in and out of therapy back and forth, that I still, when I start therapy with a different therapist, I still think, oh, here we go, back in the room, and there's still an anxiety. So but with that aside, I think also the importance of that space we give on that first session. It's really relational. It's really,
It is really relational, and I kind of bring it back to the space that we work in, which is, you know, the art psychotherapy space, and that
Yeah.
creativity, how much that ignites all of our senses. You know, it's a very somatic experience working with the arts, and there's a lot of that which is not unknown in terms of theory, but unknown in terms of someone's body perhaps understanding that. And it really, I think there's a lot of, you know, in that first session too, there's that helping to support the understanding of that actually when you are working with metaphor and images, that it will, some of it might feel a bit sort of blurry, some of it won't feel so tangible, because this is not just your mind, but your body making sense of why you're here, or your body's making sense of the therapist as a mirror, your body's making sense of that relationship, you know. And we think about if we think about that kind of neuroception, don't we? So, you know, not just the arts that's doing that in terms of the feedback, but also just in that relationship with the therapist too. You know, what is going on with me, with this person? What is going on in the space in between with this person? What's going on in the environment? You know, our environment's so important, you know, where we are. How we, you know, what do we have out, that what can be seen, what cannot be seen, what is looks like it's being hidden, or what's being, so just somebody coming into your room and actually them perhaps assessing, you know, their kind of their whole body is just built up for, as our bodies are, aren't they, feel built up to, am I going to be safe here, am I going to be okay here? And how then we as therapists support that, you know, we will do as much as we can to help you feel okay and safe here, and to notice that as well. So yeah, there's just so much going on in that first session that we don't necessarily, you know, are always really aware of.
Yeah. And I'm thinking again, about just when you were talking there about assessments and the use of that word as well. And so what the expectations that are brought into the room as well, and how we all as therapists are very individual in the way that we work, and how some clients have been to therapy before, and again the expectations that they may have about, well, this is what it was like before. And you know, we do know, don't we, that different modalities operate in different ways. There are some very formal assessments that can take place, and you know, there are lots of actual first sessions which feel much more formalized than maybe the three of us might carry out. And so there may be an expectation that I'm going to come in and I'm going to have to fill out some forms, and I might have to do different sort of formal
PHQ or
core 10 or whatever it might be, outcome measures, because those are very common in our profession. And so again, it's very so important for us, isn't it, in that first session to be as open and curious about what they are not only bringing for in terms of their story, but in terms of their expectations, their hopes, their the anxieties that might be there. And you know, and actually maybe I had a difficult previous therapeutic experience. What was that like? And what would be important in this one? And those kinds of things are very present as well.
yeah, I do actually have that. I think I definitely do have a more formal first session. There's definitely more, as you say, Sarah Jane, kind of writing down and questions asked. But in that first session, I always do ask their mental health experience, you know, with other professionals,
Yeah.
and what has been helpful out of that and what hasn't been so helpful out of that, and therefore what are they looking for this, because I think that's an important space to bring in from right at the get-go. As you say, Sarah Jane, that question of what has been for you in the mental health space, including what medication you're on and what are you diagnosed of, and etc. Coming to this space, the obvious ones, but yeah, gaining an understanding of what's been holding and containing for them before and what hasn't been, and where
Yeah.
we work with that. And especially because working with the arts, as you say, Fleur, it can take you deep, quick. Uh, and so gathering a kind of awareness of the unconscious processing that's potentially going on and what's potentially been missed or overflown previously, and their needs, I think, is not that you're going to gather all of that, as we're, I think, 96% unconscious processing or something like that. So not that you're going to gather all of that, but a little bit of awareness of safety there in the containment. That leads me to a question with you guys. Do you use arts at the beginning at the assessment? Because I personally don't. I wondered whether you guys do.
Yes, and I think it all depends on the client. So, and again, as you're going through those questions of their kind of history and their experience, and but postcards, and I think it's something to help support what it means to be working with symbols, metaphor, and images. So you can explain that to a degree, and you can experience it to a degree. So bringing in some form of kind of creativity is a way of experiencing that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Fleur. The only intervention I use would be postcards.
I'm just thinking about some games. I mean, games are really good to understand the relational process that's going on when you're playing a game, sort of particularly a game with young people and children that you might invite a game to play. And that's supportive and, yeah, as I say, understanding the way in which they are experiencing you,
Yeah,
experiencing an attachment.
yeah.
And that's really helpful. But yes, I'm trying to think of any other sort of, and another way actually, which is quite containing, is working with mandalas.
Mm.
So rather than having just a free piece of paper, or if you want to do a drawing or a painting, actually sometimes for those that might be more hesitant or you want to contain some of the images, is working within a circle.
Would you do that in the first session, Fleur? Is that what you do in the beginning, or is this something you introduce?
Routine, but I think again it depends on the client and what their experience is.
Yeah, yeah,
And also, I think for me, it's always important to invite and offer, and then just go with whatever the client takes up.
yeah,
Not that
Yeah.
anything is very right or wrong, but you are just still being aware, and you're still doing that. The noticing and observing, but always would invite. Although something that again for us to sort of think about as well, not just a separate kind of conversation, but also thinking about the power dynamics even in the first session, that actually we are the therapist, and even though I say I invite and I offer, I have to be very mindful that actually somebody may feel that that's what they need to do, because really having to think about that dynamic in the room, that we want, as much as we want to have this kind of inclusivity and an equality in a relationship, probably not. So yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of the safety of that, of being asked, to do something or to play a game, or that safety element. I felt a bit anxious as you were talking about it. I was a bit like, oh, if someone came in, and yeah, so it's definitely a space that you have to be aware of, don't you, of the person that's walking in, that I suppose experience gives you, in a sense, but definitely not enforcing any game or art process or anything onto the client, because that's what you do usually in your
Yeah.
assessment. So this integration of multiple uses or things that you can do in that first.
That's what I
And
was. Oh,
sorry, go on, Adrian.
sorry, Fleur. Just that was what was coming to mind as you were talking, Fleur, is the huge diversity that we work with between the three of us. And I know that we kind of have maybe particular areas that we specialize a little bit more in, but across the three of us, the immense diversity of age and presentation and need, and it's just vast. So actually, yeah, really important just to reiterate that all these different things we're talking about are so individual, and each new beginning will be very much an unknown to us until we're sitting with that person, and we will be containing first and foremost, but really working with who has come into the room with us and thinking about how do we move forward in our time and space that we have in a way that's safe, helpful, productive, and all those things that we're holding, all the time.
I think that with children and young people, what I have found really, really supportive is play, writing play, because play tells you an awful lot about when you're in a relationship with them through play. And I find that really helpful with children and young people. Sometimes that's why I will invite games as a more kind of playful way to be. And also environment too, I think, and where you're working, and recognizing that 2 days of my week I am in a school. So there's lots of different factors, absolutely, Ellie, to think about, when we are doing the offering, and where you are, the context of where you are, how you're working, who you're with. Yeah.
I just also want to caveat that I'm not calling all my clients grizzly bears before they come into but I think that's just wanted to caveat.
And I think it's also maybe a good time just to bring in the fact that while we are working so much with the individual and bringing all our skills and expertise and therapeutic understanding to the person that we're with, we are also very much working within a framework. And part of that, and we've touched on this earlier, but I wonder if what it's worth kind of talking a little bit more about is the contract, so that there is a contract between you and the client, which is containing and holding and boundaried. And so it's not a space that is able just to free flow it. We're holding and boundaried all the time in the way we're working.
Professional side, isn't it?
Exactly.
We're not just having a natter over a cup of tea. There is the awareness of the professional side of our work, and I think there's something really interesting in that. Again, probably could be another podcast of the transfer of money, equally, and what that first session brings in the first payment and how that looks like, and the expectations that come with that into the room, and I think the contracting and the psychotherapy agreement and the consent forms, etc., are of the first noticing of the professionalism and the boundaries that we have of ourselves, and also the containment of someone that we're holding in that professional space. And that's one of the first kind of bringing that in, alongside payment and things like that, and transaction, which I know we could talk about probably for a long time, but showing that side of us as
and the ethics, too, how because as you're talking, a word that came to my mind was confidentiality, and how we talk about that. What does that mean? And something that I always say, and which is not actually really known, not surprisingly, of course, why would they, by clients, is that let them know that I do have supervision.
Yeah.
that I will be, discussing some of the content of our sessions with my supervisor and what that means. So who else is going to know about them? Who else is going to know about their work? How's that going to be held? How's it going to be? So, and often, they don't realise that we have supervision, and so it's really about the governance of our work too. I think is really important to spell that out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And as you say, very often that's the first time in that new beginning that a client's got any idea about any of that. Many clients that come in have maybe got previous experience of therapy, but many don't. And so that's really important and interesting to notice with them, and what's that like, and what does that feel like for them to think about, actually, I thought this was just you and me, and actually you're going to be talking about me with somebody else. And there's all sorts of layers that can be very unexpected in that
yeah,
space.
yeah,
Yeah, and then of course, it's important to acknowledge that sometimes there are clients who aren't ready, and they
yeah,
come and maybe have that initial session and then feel, I'm not ready for this new beginning. Maybe there's something too overwhelming or too real that's
Mm.
there in the room, and that's also something which is something for us to hold, because we're there ready for a new beginning, and we are thinking about the therapy journey and the acorns in the room, and the potential and the hopes, and actually that doesn't always materialize for them. It could be, I don't know how you hold that, and I can't say, I can't honestly remember when it last happened, but I have had that experience, and I remember I thought about it carefully with my supervisor in terms of how I was able to hold that. And there's something about the seed, the acorn, and actually that new beginning happened. It
Mm.
might not at that stage for them turned into something. It wasn't necessarily going to sprout in the way that you might have
Mm.
hoped or imagined you'd be part of, but it's still a new beginning.
Yeah.
And it was real.
Yeah. Sometimes just writing that email, to that therapist, is so big for that
Yeah,
person. I've been thinking of that for 10 years.
yeah.
I really do need to try this therapy thing. Um, and just writing that, just researching for a therapist. Now,
yeah,
isn't that a mindful?
Oh, talk about, yeah.
yeah.
Where you look and what, maybe we can put a few websites down as well, on finding art psychotherapists in particular, potentially, to help people out, but and what of their qualifications too, because that's also a bit of a minefield. Are they qualified enough? Have they done enough hours? How long have they been from their training? Are they training? um,
Yeah.
all of the elements to it of, what's an MA, what's an MSc, what's what if they're under BAC, if they're under HCPC, if they're under UKCP. I think for clients, that's, I personally, I can probably count on one hand. And we've now had hundreds of clients, maybe even thousands, but count on one hand the clients that say, oh yeah, I totally understand that you are an integrative arts psychotherapist, and I absolutely understand what the integrative parts mean and what the arts means and how much training you've done, and then what you've gone and done in the 7 forms of art, and why psychotherapy and not therapy,
And
and
HCPC and
HCPC.
Mm.
Actually, I'm not sure if anyone has come in and known all of that. So there's something in that too. And I think if you've gone through looking through all these therapists that are in your area, or do I want online or do I want face to face? And you've managed to select a few, and then you've managed to send those emails, and then you've had, emails back, and then you've booked sessions with a couple of them, and then you've done a couple of, so many steps already that might just be enough for some people.
And that's
Absolutely.
a big leap of trust, isn't it? Then after
Mm.
all of that,
Yeah.
coming to see a therapist, and you think, okay, yes, this I could probably come back and see this therapist again. It's a huge leap of trust.
Massive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The enormity of it. And I'm I'm sort of thinking about, since I've become a therapist, how many people have asked me, how do I do this? How do I start my journey of, can you help me find a therapist? And one of the things that I do always say, in your journey of finding a therapist, it's okay to not feel like this is the right space for me or this is the right person for me. It's really important that you do feel like, yeah, this is a space in which I'm going to be able to feel safe. And that isn't with everybody. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that therapist or they don't have the skills or the qualification. It doesn't mean that at all. But it is just something really important. Maybe in your journey, in your story, that therapist isn't the one that's going to be able to help help you move forward. So that's really important, I think, for people to know as well, that it's not, there's nothing wrong at all in looking around and finding, keep on looking until you find, with this person, I think I can be honest and safe.
Hopefully.
I'm wondering if with all the richness of what we've been talking about, and there are so many potential podcasts in there, aren't there? I mean, really, we could have take so many of those strands and go off and explore those much more deeply. But I'm wondering if we draw this one to an end, and yeah,
I think there's a good flavour there of a lot of thoughts, a lot of our own experiences, and yeah, just to be thinking about, really, to be aware of.
yeah.
Well, as we finish this podcast, maybe a little bit of a shout out to people to comment, ask questions, therapists for assessment processes. What do we use? What questions do we ask? We'd be happy to talk about that more if that's what's wanted, or clients. Maybe we'll put a few links down below on where to look for therapists, and maybe a little bit of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 a numbered process for clients potentially, if they want that, or is that something that our audience would like. But please do ask questions, comment. We've got, between the three of us, we've got an extortionate amount of resource that we are very happy to share. So please do let us know what you'd need more of, or if you've heard something here today that you want us to continue talking about in a different podcast. We'd be happy to.
Yeah. And thank you for listening.
Yep. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.